and welcome to the webinar Climate Technologies and Technology Needs Assessment Activities in Africa. This webinar is hosted by UNEP DTO Partnership in relation to the Technology Needs Assessment Project and is organized in collaboration with UNFCCC, ENDA Énergie, and the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation in Uganda. My name is Leah, and I will be the moderator of today's webinar. So a couple of things before we move to the main content of our webinar. The session will last around 1 hour and will include time for a Q&A session. You will be muted during this webinar, but you're more than welcome to write your questions through the chat box. So you can do that during the presentations that will be made by the speakers. And please remember to indicate the name of the speaker your question is asked to. We will then answer your question during this Q&A session. If you're not able to stay until the end of the session, or if you want to access our presentations again, no worries, because a recording of the webinar will be available online in a few days. So you will be able to find it on the Technology Needs Assessment website. We will give you the link of the website on the last slide of the presentation. So regarding the agenda of today, Sara Trærup will introduce the TNA projects in Africa and will provide a regional overview. She will be followed by Vladimir Hecl, who will share UNFCCC perspectives on the TNA process and activities in Africa. And then Samba will share experiences from supporting African countries in their TNA process. And finally, Maxwell Otim will present the national perspectives on the TNA process in Uganda. Then we will have some time for the Q&A session, and our panelists will be answered to your questions. So before we start, I would like to inform you, as you can see on this slide, that we comply with the GDPR, so the General Data Protection Act. So this means that your personal data, such as your name, your email, your workplace, they're all safely processed information, which are stored and safely processed, and all of your rights in relations to the GDPR are respected. So that means that you have full access to the data being processed about you, and at any time you can request that inaccurate data would be deleted or rectified. So please, if you have any question, you can just contact Aristides and Louise, who are there on the website. On the PowerPoint, you can see the contact. So let me introduce the speakers of today's webinar. Sara Trærup. Sara has joined UNEP DTO in 2005, and she's both the global project manager for the TNA project and the regional coordinator for Africa. So Sara, since 2005, has supported developing countries in identifying their technology needs, and she helped countries to build capacity for accessing finance for implementing these technologies. Then Vladimir Hecl is also one of our speakers today. He's program officer at the UNFCCC in Bonn, Germany. And in 2006, Vladimir joined the technology implementation team of the UNFCCC, working in technology negotiations, in technology needs assessments, as well of non-Annex 1 parties to the UNFCCC, including both actions in mitigation and adaptation technologies. And before that, Vladimir worked over 10 years at Énergie Center Bratislava and at the Intelligent Europe Energy Agency at the European Commission. Our next speaker is Samba. Samba is an agroeconomist engineer, and he is a project officer at ENDA Énergie. His main professional areas include the technical assistance to elaborate and implement projects and programs focused on technology needs assessment and technology transfer. Samba provides technical assistance to a range of 12 African countries, and he conducts regional trainings, workshops, and in-country technical assistance for the implementation of the Technology Needs Assessment Project. And finally, Maxwell Otim. So Maxwell Otim Onapa, he is the Director of Science, Research and Innovation at the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation in Uganda. He's the coordinator of the TNA process in Uganda as well. So in addition to that, Mr. Otim, he is also the national lead negotiator for Uganda on climate technology development and transfer at the COP, and he serves as the national designated entity of the Climate Technology Center network. So thank you for listening to this short introduction, and I will now give the floor to Sara Trærup, who will introduce the TNA project.
Thank you very much, Leah, for this nice introduction. What I will do here now is that I will give you a brief introduction to the Global Technology Needs Assessment Project. And I will also provide an overview of the technologies and the sectors that countries being part of this project in the African region have prioritized during the last 10 years. Finally, I will also give you a few examples of what countries in Africa have used their technology needs assessments for. So what are the technology needs assessments? What are we talking about when we speak about the TNAs? And for many of you are maybe also familiar with what we call the technology action plans, which are also called the TAPs. Well, the TNAs are a set of activities that identify and analyze mitigation and adaptation technology priorities within key sectors of developing countries. It is a process that takes starting point in national priorities and strategies, both in terms of sustainable development and also very much, of course, in climate. So it's the national development objectives, including now under the Paris Agreement, countries' nationally determined contributions. And thanks to the information that the technology needs assessments provide about the potential, the ability and scale of climate change technologies, they can play a unique role in countries' effort in formulation and implementation of their NDC actions, and potentially also lead to increased ambitions. As we speak about the technology needs assessments, we talk about 3 steps. The first step is where countries identify within key sectors for mitigation and adaptation. They identify key technologies that contribute to increase their resilience to climate change and to lower their emissions. That is the first step, and we call that the TNA step. Then as a second step, we have the barrier analysis and enabling framework identification, because it's not enough to know what technologies are needed, but you very much need to know the whole ecosystem, the enabling frameworks that actually will make it possible to roll out these technologies that countries are in very much need of. And then as a third step, we talk about the technology action plans, also often referred to as TAPs, which are really plans for a more programmatic approach for rolling out the technologies in the countries taking part in the TNA project. It is a project that is funded by the Global Environment Facility, and it's been implemented by UN Environment through UNEP DTU partnership since 2009. So it's actually been more than 10 years that this project has been going on for now. Then we also have quite a close collaboration with the UNFCCC technology mechanism, being the Technology Executive Committee and the CTCN. And of course, also through that with the UNFCCC Secretariat, where we will hear more from Vladimir Hecl after my presentation. So coming to what we will really focus on here during this webinar is the African region. We have since 2009 at a global level supported with the countries joining this year, close to 100 countries. In the African continent, we will reach 37 countries that have taken part in this process this year. Then we work with regional centers to support countries in the region. Hence, we work with ENDA, Énergie, where we'll hear from Samba also later in this webinar. It's based in Senegal and support the Francophone African countries. And we work with University of Cape Town in South Africa to support the Anglophone countries. We have a number of activities within each of the regions. In Africa, as in Asia and Latin America, we have regional capacity building workshops. Through the lifetime of the project where countries participate, which is typically 2.5 years for each country, join 3 regional workshops, 1 for each of the steps that I described at the previous slide. Then we have technical support missions done by the regional centers who visit the countries and work with the teams in the countries. We have national trainings, and we also have help desk, we have e-learning, guidebooks and tools, which are all available through the project website. It is a nationally driven process, so each country has a national TNA coordinator and a team of national local consultants who carry out the analysis which are forming the reports countries produce under this project. It is also very much a stakeholder-driven process, so each country have expert working groups that are actively contributing to the process throughout the different stages. Moving to what are the priority sectors in Africa, I don't think this would be a surprise to many of us. This is based on data from 31 countries who have now completed their prioritization of sectors and technologies. And out of these countries, 29 have prioritized both water and agriculture as key for adaptation. And then you can see also a number of countries have prioritized coastal zones, land use and forestry, and natural disasters. That's for adaptation. When we look at mitigation, countries to a large extent, almost all except 1, has prioritized energy as key for their mitigation actions. Then we have land use and forestry, waste management, transport, and agriculture. Typically, countries focus on 2 sectors for mitigation and 2 sectors for adaptation. And within their key sectors, countries prioritize technologies and focus on 3 technologies for each of those sectors. For adaptation, this gives an overview of the technologies that countries have prioritized within the agriculture and water sectors. Here, it's of course, this is the number of technologies which are displayed, but of course, these are grouped into very broad categories. When you look at the national level and look into their reports, which are also all available on the website, of course, the technologies are articulated much more specific than what you can see here. For example, Tanzania has prioritized for the water sector, they prioritized smart water meters to detect water leakage. They have prioritized wastewater stabilization ponds and rainwater harvesting. And likewise for the agricultural sector, when you look into what countries have articulated, it's much more specific. And typically that could be, for Tanzania, again, that an example is rice intensification systems, improved seed varieties, and drip irrigation as their key technologies. When we look at the mitigation technologies and look into the energy sector, you can see that solar energy is the most prioritized group of technologies from countries, with hydropower coming in secondly. For example, Senegal has prioritized solar lanterns, solar PV systems, and solar water heaters. Whereas, for example, Madagascar has prioritized both small and large-scale hydropower. But much more details are available at the country level when you go into the reports and look for much more specific, country-specific information on each of those technologies. And as I also said, a key step of this TNA process is really to identify the ecosystems or the enabling frameworks for making these technologies work. And hence countries identify, firstly, what are the barriers for the technology transfer and diffusion, and what is actually required to further enhance this uptake. And as you can see here, the blue ones are for mitigation and the green ones are for adaptation. But these represent broad categories of where countries see that there is a need for intervention to create these ecosystems for the technologies. That can be both in terms of economic and financial measures, but also very much on, for example, you can see for adaptation, institutional and organizational improvements, information and awareness, and so forth. And all these measures are articulated in the barrier analysis and enabling framework reports of countries that are also available on the website. And just before I pass on the word, then I will give you a few examples of what have countries used it for. And this is an example from Eswatini, who completed their technology needs assessment and their technology action plans back in 2018. They used the work done under the TNA as both integrating the technologies into an Ecolobombo biosphere project under the auspices of UNESCO. They have also included their technologies in the Green Climate Fund proposal, which again were also included in their readiness program. They have also integrated the technologies into a successful proposal to the Africa Climate Fund. And not least, they used not only the outputs, the technologies from the TNAs, but also the tools that they were trained in for prioritization. They used that in articulating their nationally determined contribution. A final example is from Tunisia. And Tunisia also completed their TNA and technology action plans back in 2018. They, for mitigation, focused on key technologies within the energy and transport sectors. And for the transport sectors, one of the technologies they focused on was hybrid vehicles, and in particularly fully hybrid vehicles. And they came to the conclusion that there was a lack of approved standards in Tunisia and very low knowledge between experts on the technology. And hence, as a result of the work done through the TNA process, the government has now introduced a national program in support of hybrid cars that will support the country to establish appropriate regulatory and legal frameworks, and also building the capacity of relevant stakeholders. As a second technology, Tunisia focused on high performance engines and also incorporated it into the GCF readiness program. And as I said, you can follow and find out more about the technology needs assessment through the techaction.org website, and explore what countries have articulated in their reports. And with this, I will now give the word to Vladimir Hecl from the UNFCCC, and he will elaborate much more on the TNA and their role also in context of the Climate Change Convention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me straight ahead build on Sara presentation. Let me speak about a little bit on connection of technology needs assessment with the work of the UNFCCC Secretariat. I will have some flow on it. Then I will discuss some findings complementary to Sara from the synthesis report, the fourth we have done, compilation of synthesis of technology needs assessment received from developing countries. Then I will try to show you some latest finding out of the policy brief of Technology Executive Committee, which was or which is currently discussed and will be finalized very soon. And I also provide you some link to where the data around TNAs are stored in the Secretariat. So bear with me for this presentation, and then of course it's a Q&A part where you can ask me whatever I would miss or anything which would come to your mind. So I start first slides I would do with how we basically work with TNA until under which framework. So you can see how the technology was discussed in Paris Agreement. You can see that except sharing a long-term vision, or on the top of it, establishment of enhanced technology frameworks was seen quite important for countries. For those of you who knows, we had a technology transfer framework for a significant period before Paris, and also parties agrees to strengthen action on technology development and transfer, and technology mechanism, which is basically Tech and CTCN, serving Paris Agreement. And then to come closer to TNA, it was quite explicitly mentioned as a tool to help to operationalize Paris Agreement, and the framework TNA should be facilitate undertaking and updating these reports and implement their results through bankable projects. For that, enhanced and technical support is needed and was considered a key. And also accessing technologies that are ready for transfer. Look there, and look also at the enabling environment role. Coming even deeper in the technology frameworks, we have parties agreed on key themes, 5 key themes: innovation, implementation, enabling environments and capacity building, collaboration and stakeholder engagement, and support. I bolded implementation, where most TNA efforts are coming into, and that's logical because we have a strong element of implementation recognized by Paris Agreement, and TNA, as I said, is to support it. However, TNA is also present in other 2, of course, support, enabling environments, also collaboration and stakeholder engagement. Coming even deeper in implementation, what is this about? So under these key themes, it's about actions and activities to facilitate implementation of both mitigation and adaptation action identified using planning tools and processes. There is more of them, not only TNA. Of course, it's nationally determined contribution, strategies, long-term greenhouse gas emission development, national adaptation plans, technology roadmaps, other policies. But of course, for us as a technology team, the main source of information we're receiving from countries, as this is a country-driven process, is via TNAs. So if we look there, what is currently sort of discussed, and also I mentioned technology mechanisms, so a policy arm of that is Technology Executive Committee. So they strongly are supporting, undertaking and updating TNAs through their activities, and you will see that later, promoting alignment of TNAs with the NDCs and NAPs in adaptation to increase coherence, also to sort of avoid unnecessarily duplications, and also looking at the guidelines and updating them, not necessarily methodology as such, as this is very well enhanced and developed throughout this more than a decade, but also, for example, as you see now here, this guidance for preparing a technology action plans was finalized by Tech, and it's strongly used by countries, and that was with strong support from UNEP DTU, and also we had Tech actively engaged, including the observers to the Tech, who jointly worked to make this guidance, which is of course now helping us in developing much more, let's say, proposals-oriented technology action plans. So that would be for beginning. Now, take a look at this, and Sara mentioned that already. We had the strong support of Jeff for TNAs, and in 4 phases, we are reaching 100 countries supported to make it. And then also, it costs some money, and what is important for us that this invested money are also leveraged or even amplified in terms of implementation, which is beyond these phases of the TNA, which you can see. So now we are pleased to working with LDCs and SITs on the latest phases. But we have also strong group of countries within, or developing countries within phase 1 and phase 2. And that's now you see it a little bit under the picture, how the phases are distributed throughout the developing countries. And what you see now in the fourth synthesis report, we've been pleased to look at 53 parties, which were both phase 1 and phase 2, and it's a big group. And you can see it's really representative groups. And you can see out of those, we have 21 from Africa, which is most out of these 53. So Africa is also one of the key partners for us in terms of looking where we can go from TNA to implementation. And Sara said that, and I will repeat in the sectors, because this is where also I will continue. You can look at energy production in mitigation and agriculture and water in African countries. And you will have some cake graphs where you can see the shares. So you have mitigation, a majority share is going to energy supply and consumption sector, and waste and agriculture for energy production. And then in adaptation, agriculture and water are almost closing the circle. So you may see that this is where the needs are basically for us in terms of climate technologies. Coming closer, we have barriers again reported, and there are plenty of them. And you may see actually the report will be offered to SBI session when they will be next time to be also negotiated. So we look again from the political perspective where we can go with that report as a really heavy, I do believe, a quality, not only quantity, but a quality document, which is providing a deep overview where we stand with TNAs. So when we look at a little bit of barriers which were reported, and this is, for example, a poor infrastructure to further develop markets, and I look a little bit to also African region, missing or lacking relevant laws and regulation, lack of governmental guarantees for investors, lack of skilled personnel, or missing information about trends and new needs and approaches. So we know what is obstructing us to go to implementation from there, because that's how we are communicating with countries through reports, but also through tech key messages and also through negotiations. So that's basically a feedback we're receiving in the UNFCCC. So when we want to go further, coming back to these barriers in the report, we can also look in it in a perspective of looking at good practices and also challenges. So we try to, together with the Technology Executive Committee, look at how to summarize these gaps, challenges, and good practices, how to offer them further. And to offer them further, the tech is usually producing a policy brief, which is targeting a larger audience and try to make these messages clearer, both to negotiators, but also to other interested stakeholders who have some ideas and intentions to work with that material, either as an investors or as a donors, or to provide it as a learning basically document to enhance capacity. So the contents of that paper, which is currently will about to be finished, so we are talking here about 2020 documents, is describe gap and challenges and good practices of this process and this implementation process, mainly very interesting for us as a secretariat, where we're going, as I said, where we're going with that very good informative documents. Then we look at good practices as a specific chapter of the brief. We look at examples to enhance implementation, and we also offer recommendation on various levels. So what we try to distill from all this information from countries, how to tackle these barriers which I mentioned before, domestically, regionally, internationally, financially, private sector, others. So take a look, and that's building on the barriers, but here we are the gaps of challenges reported where lack of domestic capacities also to take these reports and implement them, basically, not to write them. To write them, we are pretty fine and perfectly well. To take them and implement them. And there are many whys, but still, this is the fact. Yeah, let's take a look at it as a basis. And then it's limited access to funding sources in many developing countries, still are. Although there are new, let's say, schemes which I learn about in Kenya, for example, or Uganda and other countries, they are coming. And then is lack of involvement of funding institution in early stages of preparation of project proposal. Not easy, but there is possibility to close this gap. Then implementation oriented approaches not probably sufficiently considered at the levels of ministries, let's say. Late engagement of funders with TNA team, and sometimes mismatch between priority needs and priority of donors. If you look at some good practices before I come, let's be positive now because they are, and then we come further to how they responding to that barriers. In Mauritius, we had a great project. Sara already mentioned some good practices. Eswatini, Tunisia. Now I'm talking Mauritius, for example. That was a waste heat recovery project, and this is nicely promoted again in UDP, UNEP. Let's say a publication on success stories. Yeah, this is waste heat recovery for energy efficient boilers, and this went to Jehl as a proposal addressing energy efficiency in industries, working together with International Atomic Energy Agency. Then we have collaboration highlighted as a success factors which help to move this report further. We had in Senegal, and Senegal is here with us. They can talk more about this. Update of biomass-based technologies for electricity production. Again, the success factor was responsibilities were shared between public and private sector stakeholders, as suggested by the TAP guidance. And we have more of this. There are dozens of such initiatives. So let's look at some ways probably to think about to enhance this implementation. So this engagement of stakeholders and ministries during TNA, a post-TNA phase, in order to include prioritized technology in the new ongoing programs of government. We can call it mainstreaming, we can call it further promotion or highlighting. Then again, look at other teams. What are doing other teams in the countries, such as NDC working on NAMAS, NDC? Do we have a person who is sort of making focal point of Jehl, somebody who has a contact with GCF? Can we look at this strong material TNA offers and build on it further? We can develop a pilot project. The CTCN is there, the implementation arm of the technology mechanism. They are there to help. They are still there to help with going through feasibility studies, with enlarging the network of stakeholders which are interested in the project. Then look at the possible funders in early stage. Can we inform them about this work? This is again a question to countries, whether they are able to orient themselves within their own environment and promote it further. It's tough in 24 months or 24 months. UNEP, UDPs directly working countries to sort of like prescribe them this micromanagement action, but these are very important to make a difference. And look at GCF, for example, what they offer, but they offer activities now to help with implementation of projects, and have a equipped and trained champion. It was very important. Who is the person? Who are the people behind which they can take an initiative? So we split, let's say, some recommendation on domestically, which we thought that the further promotion proved very well in past for those who implemented, and also engagements of other experts, and promoting also through NDEs of this good work, sharing this with governments, whether they can look at this barrier of creation of, let's say, enabling environments, including laws and regulation, which I mentioned before. And also look whatever happened with TNA, and this we don't have as in a project themselves, but for us this tracking to know what's going on is extremely important to promote it, to show back also to the convention, to show back also to the Paris Agreement, to show back that things are moving, that we really can see the progress in terms of implementing this or turning these needs to reality, which I mentioned before. This set of needs, let's say from a helicopter view, but very important, the quantity is highest in energy, agriculture, and water. So can we have some projects there to show back into the convention, to the technology mechanism, to other stakeholders, to our observers, etc. So this is basically what I want to share with you, where we are standing now. And last but not least, also information barrier is mentioned all the time, but you have in terms of theoretical supply a great amount of information available at UNEP UDP, where Sara was spoken, also at our homepage on TT Clear, where you can see the whole sorts of information under TNA, which I just highlighted, but also first column you see tech. They are all tech meetings, the documents they are discussing. So that's a great supply to orient where other countries are also standing. We can also help in sort of share your information further. It will be actually our pleasure, because that's a very nice work. So feel free to contact us, and of course ask today. Whatever I can respond, I will. So I will go back to my colleagues. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vladimir, for giving me the floor. So also thank you, all of you, for attending this workshop, this webinar. So I would like to share with you a perspective coming from a regional center who is working in the TNA since the beginning. So I would like to focus my intervention on challenges and learned lessons. So basically, first, what we want to share is that ENDA is established in Senegal and is working throughout all countries in Africa. But since it's the beginning of the TNA, ENDA is providing a technical support, but also process support to all the participant countries, starting from 2009 up to now. And more than 25 countries have been supported, including African, Middle East, but also Caribbean countries. So at the moment, we are conducting the TNA 3, which is starting in 2018 up to 2021. It covers 6 countries in Africa and also IT. And to give you a deep understanding of what we are providing in terms of support, it starts from in-country technical support, but also training consultant to use the methodologies, but also all the tools. And also, what is the most important thing is to help national stakeholder to elaborate a very good quality of report for the 3 phase, the prioritization of the technologies, analysis of barriers, but also elaboration of what we call TAP, Technology Action Plan. But also, we are sharing our experience and lesson learned throughout some international fora, but like also throughout a webinar as we are doing now. But also we participate a lot on elaborating briefing notes and also help countries to ease the national consultation and the political will. So these are, in a nutshell, what we are providing in terms of support for all the countries. And I think that Vladimir and TNA have already, and Sara have already touched on the main barriers, but and the technology action plan. But just allow me to highlight one important thing, is that the economic and financial constraints are key for developing and deploying technologies. But what countries have sought and proposed in terms of action are mainly to provide technical assistance to conduct feasibility studies, but also to develop like a very appropriate capacity building program, as Sara have mentioned, but also to set up a kind of regulatory and institutional framework for all the sectors and technologies that have been prioritized. So, and these are the main action plans that have been proposed by the country so far. And just now to come really into the concrete points that I would like to share with you is about challenges and lessons learned. So it can be analyzed throughout two angles. The first one is about the process itself. The process, what we have learned is that when it comes to the prioritization and barrier analysis, sharing data is the main constraint, and also the administrative institutional burden. So it delays a lot the process, and it delays the process, it delays the planning of the working of the groups. But what we thought are the lesson learned, and it can be shared to overcome these challenges, is that the TNA process helped to capitalize the existing technologies, but also it helped the national stakeholder to build up capacity on methodologies, but on tools, and it helped countries a lot to elaborate other documents related to the climate change process, like NAP, NAMAS, and all these things. So helping national stakeholders to be in the process for all the three steps help a lot to enhance the capacity of the stakeholders. But also the TNA process also help to identify appropriate risk for each action plan. So, and this information, you will see it as a basis that for the elaboration of program and technology transfer assistance. When it comes to the actual arrangement, what we see is that in many countries, especially in Africa, we have a lot of process related to climate, and each process have its own committee, and this way of doing give us imply a lot of issue when it comes to the stakeholder engagement, but also have delayed the process really. So what we recommend, and that is some lesson that we can share here, is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because there are some committees that have been already established, as for example, that in Togo they have established the NDC committee, and that's the same committees that have been used to undertake the TNA process. In this way, we don't have to face the issue, and this way of doing help to strengthen and the committee, strengthen the stakeholder engagement process. And there are several examples in Senegal, Seychelles, and all these things help to really enhance the mainstreaming of the TNA into the existing process. These are some learned lessons that are key to really have a successful TNA process. And we know that the TNA 4 will be start soon, and these are something that can be taken into consideration for the implementation of the TNA process 4. And also, what we learn is that TNA really is a pathway to implement other climate technologies process. What the barrier analysis and the technology action plan provide relevant background information for the elaboration of project and program. We can say about the national budget that have been done in Ivory Coast, and many other countries use the information provided by the technology action plan to elaborate and also to implement project, and that is funded throughout the GCF or GF or other funding schemes. But also, Vladimir have mentioned that this output of the TNA help really to better define what are the key needs in terms of technology transfer assistance. And we have seen several examples coming from countries like in Senegal, in Mali, and most of the countries in Africa use the TNA results to elaborate requests that is submitted to the CTCN. But also, the TNA process help also to really help facilitate the interlinkages between the other processes as NAP, NDC, low emission development strategies, but all these processes that need to be elaborated can be built on the basis of the information already provided by the TNA output. But also, as I mentioned, it helps also to build up a capacity building for the national stakeholder. And in terms of recommendation, since the TNA 1 up to now, we know that the success of the TNA process will rely on some key factors. The first one is about the leadership and of the team that is coordinating the TNA at the national level. So because that the coordinator and the national consultant have to ease the process for mapping all the stakeholders, but also to ensure the proper implementation, because it's not really the ending point of this process is not the document itself, it's how to move further in terms of implementation. So having a very well coordinated team can help to ease the process, can help also to ease the buy-in of the policymaker, and also the engagement of the TNA coordinator into the climate process as the technology transfer process represented by the NDE, the focal point of the GEF and NAMAs, and all these climate-related processes. The full engagement of the coordinator can help to really ease the buy-in, but also to inform more about what is there, what have been done by the TNA, what are the main barriers and action that have been prioritized for the sectors, energy and waste for the mitigation, but also agriculture and water resources for the adaptation. So these are some things that can be integrated well mainstream into the other processes if really the TNA teams coordinated by the coordinator are engaged in this process, have a key relationship with the process. But last but not least, what we have also learned is that the engagement, the early engagement of national planning division and economists or bank manager can help to better assess the financial needs and to ease the resource mobilization. Because what we have seen is that there are some action plans that have been not well elaborated because of some constraints when it comes to the assessment of financial and economical aspect. And the early engagement of these stakeholders can help to better assess the financial need, and also to elaborate very well bankable projects that can be submitted to the funding agencies, GCF and GEF and all the funding donors. So these are some learned lessons that I picked from what we have been doing for supporting countries, and also to help for the implementation of the TNA 3 and 4 that is coming up. So with that, I will hand over to Maxwell, coming from Uganda, to share also their perspective. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. So we are one of the countries that has benefited from this third phase of technology needs assessment, and we are so grateful for that. The process started some time back in 2018 with some preliminaries. So I just want us to walk through what we've done so far, so that I can bring my everybody up to date with what's going on. So I think this screen that we see is really basically a background that we all know. But the message that I want to put across here is that at the very outset, once we got the process going, we held an inception workshop in 2018 where we had a diverse stakeholder community coming from different sectors. And the idea was to try and identify where do we as a country, which sectors do we want to address if we are really to, one, go along with the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and more so to try and see how we can address our NDCs. So in effect, the stakeholders identified sectors under adaptation, the agriculture, forestry, and water. And then under mitigation, the stakeholders zeroed on the energy sector. And after that, of course, then we got our consultants on board, and they started working immediately and to come up with a long list of the technologies that they could get from whatever sources within the country. So the prioritization workshop was held in 2019, and the whole idea was for us to identify and prioritize technologies both in adaptation and mitigation. And like I said, these were energy for mitigation, agriculture, forestry, and water for adaptation. And for each of those technologies, we also went ahead to identify at least 3 technologies for each of those sectors. So that means a total of 12 technologies were identified for future diffusion and upscaling and possible dissemination. And again, like it has already been articulated by the previous speakers, one of the key things that we are looking at is how can this process also help us to operationalize our nationally determined contributions. So it's for us a very useful process that will help us to implement these contributions. So in the workshop, we had a diverse stakeholder community. We had a total of 32 experts. They're coming from the different sectors. And of course, here I just said agriculture, water, and forestry. But there were others that also are within in the workshop. And the others were stakeholder community was coming from the private sector, the farmer organization, technology providers and users, because this is a key constituency, and also development partners, including, of course, representatives of the GEF, and also the media that participated for purposes of dissemination of whatever is taking place. So going forward in the highlights of the workshop, a number of observations were made that things are changing very, very rapidly. And because of that, we needed to take note and prioritize technologies that we can handle within a defined framework. Otherwise, if we spread it, if we give it a very huge time horizon, it would be quite difficult for us because of a friction of time, and then it becomes irrelevant. At that time when we started, we were also developing our national development plan, which is a planning framework, a 5-year planning framework that is meant to help us on a mission to our Vision 2040. And therefore, we're also trying to gauge the discussions that were going on in the NDP3 that has not been concluded now. So besides, of course, the various documents that we had, the numbers, all the strategies, the policy, the climate policy, all this and that, and also the NDC, we were being guided by also a number of other developments. So these are the outcomes that I was talking about, the different sector working groups identified. So going forward, out of the long list, if you look at this slide, you look at the left, that was the list of technologies that our consultants came up with. But during the prioritization session, we came up with a short list that you look at on the right, A, B, C. And this is in the energy sector, which is mitigation. One of the things that we looked at is off-grid solar provision, especially given the pattern of settlement in Uganda. We thought that at the rate at which we are electrifying, it might take a long time, and some areas might not even receive hydro immediately. So rooftop solar system was prioritized. Institutional cook stove. This is very important to us because they have huge institutions that consume a lot of biomass in terms of energy in preparing food. You're talking about schools, you're talking about prisons and other institutions where this, people congregate. One of the interesting technologies that was prioritized is biolatrines. That the stakeholders thought that, as a matter of fact, there's a lot of biogas being produced in all these institutions. That besides this institutional cookstove, if these institutions could tap into the biogas that is being emitted from biolatrines, we would go a long way to mitigate energy paucity. This other sector that we looked at is agriculture, and on the left you see the long list, but we zeroed on three areas. One of them is plant breeding, because the guiding principle here is that climate change is coming and is here to stay. And because of that, it's occasioning a lot of biotic and abiotic stresses to the plants that we have, to such an extent that productivity is going down. You're talking about issues of drought. How can they be addressed? Flood. There's a lot of new pests that are emerging, and they are resistant to all sorts of chemicals that are now being used. So plant breeding was highlighted as one of the key areas. Besides, of course, agricultural extension of how and under this would be the issue of climate smart agriculture, that this responsive agriculture extension would address key issues like climate smart agriculture that would enable the communities to adapt and also lower the cost, lower the emission, as well as produce sufficient food for the community. That is in agriculture. The next sector that we looked at is forestry, also under adaptation. And out of the long list of 11, we produced 3, and centering really around the issues of management. That forest management should be, integrated forest management should be flagged, where forests can be a source of livelihood, not only out of trees, but possibly from also other resources that could be embedded within forests. And with that, would be there would be need for value addition to forest products. So forest-based enterprises should be encouraged to grow. How can within the forest itself you can process timber so that you avoid a translocation of biomass that would otherwise remain useful in the forest. And then, of course, the role of farmers in the management and generation of forests, so that they see this forest as beneficial to them. The other sector that we looked at is water, and one of the key priority that technologies that was flagged is the rooftop rainwater harvesting. That would, of course, mean that it would provide a lot of water for family use and also for agriculture, particularly in the peri-urban areas, even in the rural areas, because there's a lot of runoff from our roof during the rainy season. Then also, of course, even the surface water runoff itself. How can we tap this water so that they are may be reserved in reservoirs, maybe valley dams or valley tanks, so that in the event that there are unexpected droughts, then this water can be released for agriculture. And then, of course, deep well extraction for water for consumption as also agricultural productivity. So these are the key areas that we looked at. Plus, of course, the last one, which being, I think this is a repetition, this is forestry. I've already talked about this. So in effect, out of this, our consultants worked and also produced their reports that they submitted to our partners did to you. So we are now at the stage when we need to move forward, and we're doing now a barrier analysis and a loading framework. We had planned to do this before the climate week, but even when the climate week was postponed because of this challenge, we are still blessed to go ahead, and we actually held a 2-day workshop to do barrier analysis and a loading framework. And basically, the objective of the workshop was really to help us analyze the different barriers that constrain the adoption of these technologies, and also identify measures that would help us as a country to overcome these technologies. And of course, the last one was also what enabling frameworks that do we need in order to enable us to adopt these technologies, upscale and disseminate them. So during the workshop, we updated our participants on the processes like I've taken you through above. We also had briefs on the barrier analysis and the progress that the consultants had made, because immediately after identification of these technologies and prioritization, our consultants went ahead to identify all the technologies and the associated barriers. So they had a long list, which we made an exposure to the participants, and that stimulated a lot of discussions. And eventually, of course, for in-depth analysis, we had breakout sessions. So very, very quickly, the objective really was for us to look at the barrier analysis. So the presentations mainly were made by our consultants and in the different sectors that I've highlighted above: agriculture, water, and forestry. And we also discussed the methods of barrier identification. We had the long list of the barriers that I talked about, and the categorization of these barriers based on certain criteria that we had developed. And thereafter, we did barrier analysis. So again, like I said, it is based on this. The first day, we had a discussion on themes based on the different sectors. Then the second day, we identified measures and enabling frameworks for the prioritized technologies. And a lot of group work was done really so that we could cluster the different stakeholders according to their areas of expertise and interest. And the different groups, of course, drilled inside and then made the reports during the plenary. So very quickly, again, some of the criteria that we used for identifying barriers was, the question is, who is likely to diffuse the technology? Is it a national institution? Is it a local government? Is it an NGO? Is it small scale, large, international? And what is the cost of the technology? That we have identified the barriers that hinder the adoption. And then, of course, we looked at the existence of support structures and the capacities for the technology acquisition and diffusion. Some of these technologies are there, but it depends on the cost, the operations and all that. So that was also looked at. And then, of course, prior national process in overcoming technology, and then the potential opportunities. What opportunities exist if these technologies were to be rolled out? And then the core benefits. Is the technology responsive to both mitigation and adaptation? And of course, the issue of biodiversity. Now, I think it was Vladimir who highlighted some of the key issues that were identified as constraints in the previous technology needs assessment. They're quite similar to what we also identified generally, but this is just a short list. The issues of economy and the finances, the access to input, the market viability, cost, demand was some of the things that came out very, very clearly. There were other non-financial barriers like information, awareness, human capital, that's ability to leverage the technology itself, support infrastructure. I think that came up during the presentation, the prior presentation, the complexity of the the technology and our operational abilities that is needed, the existing ecosystem in terms of policy and legal and regulatory framework, institutional arrangement, the structures in place, are there incentives that would facilitate the adoption of such technology, the cultural setting, there are technologies that might have implication in terms of the culture in which it is being deployed, issues of gender, which of course is very, very important, issues of biophysical, mechanical setting of the technology. So these are some of the issues. But as I wind up, one of the things that we had noticed during the course of our work was that we were not, weren't feeling very embedded in the issues of gender in technology needs assessment. So we had actually asked that we needed somebody from the regional office to come and sit with us during this workshop. But good enough, then DTU brought on board that the last session, which is gender in technology needs assessment, which I believe has empowered us and our consultant and to be able to leverage this perspective. So this is what I wanted to share, and I thank you very much. I'm not sure whom I'm supposed to pass this to, but I think Leah can pass it on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Maxwell. Yeah, so now it is time for the Q&A session. We have received a lot of very interesting questions. I will reply to the first one as it's quite general one and a reminder. So where can we find the country TNA reports? All the reports, so technology needs assessment reports, barrier analysis and enabling frameworks, and technology action plans, they can all be found online on the technology needs assessment website. So the link will be provided in the next slide, and then you can just find all the reports online on the database. So feel free to look at them. And then I would like to continue with the question to you, Maxwell. So the coronavirus crisis shows that economies should focus more on resilience and sustainability, but there are at the same time views suggesting that we should just drop climate ambitions and focus on tackling this crisis. So in your case, how will your consultations prioritize climate technologies?
Okay, that is a very interesting question.
Yes.
And one has to see a smart way of linking the pandemic to climate change. I think, first of all, I think that my hope is that the pandemic is not something that is going to go on and on and on and on. I want to believe that at a certain time the pandemic will go down. But having said that, right now, as a matter of fact, we can't do much because all the resources and all the attention has been focused on the coronavirus pandemic. And as a matter of fact, there's not much we can do now. But in the event that things went off, one of the things that we have always argued again, that even pandemics and emerging and re-emerging infections that are coming up, a lot of it, if you analyze, they're actually due to climate change because of the way that humans are now moving closer and closer to wildlife. Most of these diseases are actually what we call zoonotic diseases that are coming from animals to humans, because humans are now moving into the ecosystem that originally was only meant for the wildlife. So in a way, we are still connected. The pandemic, this and any other that will come, still has a dimension of climate change. And also plus the fact that even the changes themselves are allowing a lot of pathogens, insects, name it, to sprout and survive because of the changes. So there is still a link with climate change. But having said that, I think right now, we can't do much because all the resources that are available have been focused on the COVID pandemic. But once the situation eases, I think we should be able to move forward with the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maxwell. We have one question going back through the presentation that Vladimir made. So since countries highlight similar sectors and barriers when they do their TNA reports, is there an option to bringing countries together in developing regional or inter-country proposal for regional level intervention? So there was this example in the case of water. Many water bodies are shared on a regional level. And same goes for agriculture challenges like epidemic diseases or pests. They are usually related to drought. So such issues can be handled more efficiently at the regional level. So is that something you are working on?
There are a couple of layers, of course. On a level of negotiations, of course, countries are represented with negotiators. Few of them have knowledge on these issues and following technology agenda item for a long time. They may discuss it on that level because there is a lot of room and a lot of not only negotiation room, but also a lot of room in terms of side events and informal forums where these issues can be debated with some vision on a, let's say, level of ministries or level of governments or level of regional leaders whatsoever. Then the second layer we do regionally, and this is in collaboration with UNEP UDP. These are dissemination sharing workshop, which we were about to organize one now, but due to the recent pandemic, we cannot do much. So they are organized in each region by UNEP UDP, and the aim is to disseminate the information from TNA and of course approach other countries in the region. And another way is just that countries take initiative themselves, but again there are forums for that. That was a planned and every year happen in past, and for example an African Climate Week. The last one was recently planned in Uganda. There are also forums to discuss that. If you are talking about, let's say, face-to-face or physical presence of representatives of project developers and stakeholders. So these are some examples which we are actively engaged, and we know they are quite valuable and worthy to be present and to participate. And of course, this initiative can be shared also virtually. We can highlight such as issues, for example, when you observing meetings of bodies such as Technology Executive Committee or even the approaching a CTCN. So from perspective of the Secretariat, this is what I can recommend. But there are dozens of private initiatives and also initiatives on expertise level organized, which this could be a platform to highlight such as issues. Because as you noticed, I also, one of the, let's say, possible way out or close the implementation gap on the domestic and regional level was to the countries learn from each other from a regional point of view, from their successes and challenges. And we had such an example, for example, at the side event, Gambia was speaking about their coastal zone projects and successes and problems, and there were countries from the region listening and making notes. So
great, thank you very much, Vladimir. I have one question for Sara. So it was mentioned during the presentation that TNAs, they need to be regularly updated. So how often should this be done? And is this considered under the supported phases? And I have another question, which is quite linked to it. Can countries actually take part to different phases? So if one country has been taking part to the first phase of TNA, so precedent TNA activities, and have done their report, can they participate again?
Thank you for these very good questions, and I'll try to give as accurate response as I can. On the question on updating TNAs, of course, this is something that comes up more and more frequently. And as of now, those countries that have been part of the TNA since 2009 have so far not been updating their TNAs, at least with the support from the GEF under this global support project. As far as the information we have for now, resources within GEF global set-aside are not available for the update yet. Countries can use their STAR allocations for updating their TNAs. It is something that also comes up during negotiations, so maybe Vladimir also wants to add to this once I'm done. But so far, there's limited, I would say, opportunities for updating the existing, what we call second generation TNAs. On how to take part in the different phases, then it is a bit misleading to say TNA phase 1, 2, and 3. And because it is the same process that countries go through, just in different groups of countries joining the project. So it is actually the same process that all countries go through, either if they are part of TNA phase 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. It is all a different group of countries each time going through the process. So it is not so that a country that was part of TNA phase 1 should be part of TNA phase 2 and 3. And also a country being part of TNA phase 4 doesn't mean that they should have been part of TNA phase 1 or 2 or 3. It is just the same process with a new group of countries joining. But maybe I could also let Vladimir contribute to the question on TNA updates, and also in terms of the negotiations and what the future will bring in terms of TNAs.
Yeah, we're facing this question quite a lot of time. And actually, what's the status, just again, from sort of a bigger picture? Almost every developing country has made the technology needs assessment at least once. This started in 1999, 2000 already. So we are the oldest process, probably from the recent processes of the convention. Now, we have many countries already which did it twice. And their priorities, of course, are and needs are evolving in time. So the option is to look at also possibilities of other funding than GEF, because the GEF is now focused on least developed countries and small island developing states. So this, as we know, is going to last for another more than a couple of years. But there are other options also with domestic funding or money which are paid or countries having from the GEF. So there is a national allocation which every country has, and it's up to them, as I was informed, or we were informed by the GEF, how they're going to spend it within certain priorities. So whether they can also allocate part of it to TNAs. Another discussion on working on TNA, but this is more on looking to implement their already prioritized needs and technology action plans, is discussion with the GCF through the readiness or other streams they have. So this is what we know now. We also are in touch with the GEF on a future of funding of TNA process. However, as I said, this is sort of secured for also, let's say, 4 or 5 years ahead of now, and they don't plan to extend that range. So they also recommend also at all meetings to look either a national allocation or looking or discussing further with GCF. There were many examples, not only one or two, more examples that countries did their own funding of TNA or used other sources than GEF sources. And these phases, which Sara mentioned, 1, 2, 3, 4, we have also TNAs outside this work of UNEP UDP. There are technology needs assessment which are done with, let's say, bilateral agreements. We had such a of China, for example. I know that I believe Kuwait did one. We had Iran. We had more countries which did TNAs using other sources. So this is up to the countries to decide now. And if there is a 5th round or 6th or whatever, you'll be informed. And also you'll be informed on eligibility of participation.
Great, thank you very much. We have a question that could be for Sara. So how many prioritized technology end up as funded projects? So this question really is about the following up the TNA activities once the country have determined the technologies they want to implement in their country. How does it end up to be a funded project, and also who takes the lead on the TNA follow-up and implementation?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question, and it's a very good question, and it's also a very difficult question to answer, but I'll do my best. What we see is that when countries have a so-called champion or several champions, persons who are actually taking lead and takes the ball and goes with it, that's actually where you see things are happening. We continuously are trying to keep track of what is being implemented, and we do this together with the UNFCCC Secretariat, with the tech, and also collaborate closely together with the CTCN, as CTCN also provides technical assistance to countries based on their TNA work. So we do have a database where we add all the time as we get information, and we do on a regular basis share questionnaires and follow up with countries to collect the information. But it is difficult because it takes quite some time before things are implemented. Imagine that from the time where you have your priorities, you have your analysis ready, but then you also need to develop a full proposal and go through the application process, which may also take quite a long time. So I would say, yes, we do aim to track what is being implemented. We do have a database, and we do on a regular basis communicate examples of how countries are using the TNAs and technology action plans. But as said, it's quite difficult to get the full information also because countries are using it in different ways, integrating it in existing planning processes, in their nationally determined contributions, but also in concrete proposals. So it's very difficult to keep track of, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to quickly jump on the previous question on the TNA update and give you the floor, Samba, because I could see you wanted to give some inputs on that question as well. So please feel free to answer and reply this question regarding the updates of TNA reports and activities.
Thank you again, Leah. I would like just to share with you some update on what have been being doing now. I think that some countries that have already undertaken the TNA, as I can name it Côte d'Ivoire or some other country, they have just requested from the readiness, GCF readiness pipeline to consider having this update. And it is done throughout the CTCN technical assistance. So a country that have already undertaken the TNA can, if possible, elaborate a request and submit it to the CTCN, and also the CTCN can help to provide this assistance to update the sectors, but also the technologies so that the country can align their sectors and technologies throughout the implementation of the NDC's target. So this is just an example that can be explored by other countries that have already done their TNA. That is, thank you.
Thank you, Samba. And I can ask you another question, Samba. So
yes.
Yeah, so based on the previous presentation that we had today, we could see that there is a high attention on technical, economic, policy, and legal aspects when countries carry on their TNA activities. And it is, of course, important, but what about soft skills, such as human resources, creatives, and novel technologies? These are also skills that are necessary for the upscale of climate technology. So are these soft skills also taken into account while countries do their TNA reports?
Yeah, yes, I think that I can. This can be viewed in two ways. The first one is what I have say is that the TNA as a process help to improve the capacities, because it helps the experts who are working in different sectors to know more about how to prioritize, how to analyze barriers, but how to identify action. The process itself is the capacity building. And the second one is the result from the TNA. As I said, after the legal framework that are asked in terms of action, most of the countries that have undertaken the TNA have asked to have a program that improve the skills for all the experts. I can take an example for the implementation of solar PV plants. Most of the technologies that are related to energy need a kind of improvement of skills of national expert, student, researcher to improve their skills. And all these actions related to the capacity building have been well expressed in the most of the TNA. So I think that these are some layers that have been well identified, but also help countries to have an overall picture of what are the needs and how these needs can be well integrated. And the example given by Sara for the Tunisia is a good example. So based on the TNA result, they know that these are some needs, and how to enhance or to face this need is to develop a kind of national program to enhance the level of skills of the technical experts who are working on the energy sector. So these are something that that I can share for now.
Thank you very much, Samba. So I think it's time to close the webinar. So first, thank you very much to all the panelists for the interesting presentations and also to this interesting answer to all the questions. And thank you for all the participants for your interesting question. So we really hope that the presentations will be beneficial for all of you, and you will be able to find the recording of the webinar as well as these presentations on the TNA website in the coming days. So you can see on that slide that there is a link of the website. So please feel free to navigate through the website. And if you have any question, you can also write Sara. So now it's time to wish you a very good day, and thank you very much to all for your attention. Bye bye.